We're back on FreightWaves now, and we have a special guest coming up with us right now.
That's right. We have Matthew Leffler joining us again this morning. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us.
Guys, I'm happy to be here.
Now we're talking about the FMCSA and speed limiters. Once again, we've got you on a chat about this. So let's get into it. What is at stake here? What are we seeing as of right now?
I have a need for speed limiters to be precise. What we have right now is an ongoing conversation of how fast should commercial vehicles go. And it's been talked about since 2016, but it's not new. We've had speed limitations for commercial vehicles back in the 1970s. And so the fight right now is about a notice, we call an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking. So the FMCSA has said, we think we're going to start limiting speed for commercial vehicles traveling interstate between different states. And that notice has allowed people to comment. So we are now at the end of the beginning.
So Matthew, when you think about this, how is this different than what we've probably seen in the past before?
Well, this is using the technologies that exist today. Every single new truck that's made, and actually some up to 2003, have these engine control units, or these ECUs, electronic engine control units. And you can use these things to limit the speed a vehicle can go. So you are physically incapable of going faster than the speed that's set on that inhibitor. And so using this technology, you can force people to go a certain speed no matter what happens. And so you've seen so far the lines up of the American Trucking Association and the Truckload Carriers Associations, both have been kind of open to this regulation, whereas the owner-operators and their groups have been kind of hesitant. This is a conversation of safety versus freedom.
So why not use the ECUs? Maybe do something different. Why?
Well, it makes it so you can't go around the edge. I mean, the whole idea of a speed limit is who's going to enforce it? Are you going to have a bunch of officers checking them out with the radar guns? No, we have machines that can do that for us. And if you can limit the speed by the engine, you will not have people capable of speeding. Now, this is coming in the line of the highest diesel prices we've seen in a very long time. And one of the ways you can control cost for your trucking company is to go slower. You burn less diesel. So there is a piece of this on the overall cost side, but ultimately using the ECU is the way that you're going to limit speed in the future.
Now, Matthew, you mentioned something really interesting about how owner-operators and those independent folks out there might say, it's going to be a battle versus freedom. And from what I hear sometimes from truckers and drivers, I hear, it's just not what it used to be. Is this going to be another one of those nails in the coffin of drivers just saying, you know what, I'm getting out, this industry is just done?
It has never been easy to be a truck driver. And safely delivering freight on time and undamaged is one of the most challenging things you can do in America. And to the point of losing the freedom to go faster, sure, it will likely bring some people to say, I'm just tired of this. Because what's going to end up happening is if you're a trucking company, you may be forced to bring your truck to a dealer or an aftermarket provider and have them dial into your machine and slow you down. And you'll probably have to pay for that. And so this is a big constraint for a lot of people that are, I just want to drive my truck. Well, you can do that after you go to the shop and get your speed regulation decreased and all these other ancillary regulatory impacts. But at the end of the day, there is a good case to be made for safety. And as we all know, as motorists on the highways, when you're watching one truck pass another truck going half a mile an hour faster, you're watching two trucks going in a kind of a snail's race, and you might be behind them for a mile or a mile and a half. This will probably make that impossible. You couldn't pass anymore. Even some of the largest private fleets like Walmart have already adopted 65 miles an hour as their maximum speed with their limitations on the ECU. So this is just the way the technology is moving, and there's really not much you can do to change the trends and forces that shape our industry.
I almost think of this causing safety problems. I used to drive a work vehicle where the speed was tracked, and every time I went above a speed limit, because I've only ever done that a couple times, of course, my supervisor would get a message. And if it happened once or twice, he believed I was merging, I was passing people, I was getting ahead of things. But if you're not able to do that, maybe you get stuck in a sticky situation on the highway. That's what I start to think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. So what you're talking about is essentially an electronic logging device or a telematics device that reports how fast you're going back to somebody else. That's happening already. But what we're talking about here is making the engine incapable of going faster. And so you could put your foot all the way on that pedal and it's not going quicker. So what will likely happen is you'll have to train drivers differently. You're not going to be able to overtake somebody as you've done in the past. So there certainly could be some safety implications. But I'll just mention, I cut my teeth as a transportation lawyer defending trucking companies that were involved in catastrophic accidents. And generally speaking, if you slow trucks down, the injuries that happen, the damages that get done are generally less. Now, we're going to see a lot more stuff coming out of this. So what's going to happen next with this is you have this advance notice of the proposed rulemaking with the comments. Next is the actual rule that's going to be proposed. When that rule gets proposed, then people will be able to comment again. So like I said, we're at the end of the beginning. This is a long conversation that could go out for months, if not potentially years.
Now, Matthew, when you're thinking about this scenario here playing out, there's so many other factors that also kind of go into this. Of course, you mentioned that potentially it being a lot safer for a lot of drivers out there when you're looking at different types of accidents. Does this also potentially slow down the delivery of certain goods and items? Or another one, potentially, you mentioned diesel a little bit earlier, does this make the trucks a little bit more gas efficient potentially?
That's a really good question. And I think that the idea of how fast you can deliver something is a really important thing to keep in mind. So what's going to happen right now is many of the largest trucking companies already have these inhibitors in place. They can't move as quickly as the owner operators can. This would essentially level set and say everyone's going to move a little bit slower. Shippers are already understanding that things are going to go slow these days. There's a truck driver shortage, or at least a retention issue in the industry. There's a lot of barriers that prevent things to get delivered safely, on time, and undamaged. We will likely have longer wait times, potentially, but again, it's only a couple miles an hour difference. Most trucking companies will have regulators at like 72 miles an hour. And if you're safe for a long period of time, maybe go a little bit faster. But the idea that 65 will change the way we buy and consume goods, probably not likely. I do think that it does end up being more efficient for fuel. And I think it will save trucking companies money to slow down, not just on the diesel consumption, but you reduce your wear and tear on your brakes, on your maintenance of your motors, and on the tires you run. So you will save money as you go slower, but it does mean that truck drivers are going to end up working more hours for less money, because if you're paid by the mile, it will take you longer to get from point A to point B.
Now, when looking at potential legal situations, does this kind of exempt truckers from getting pulled over for speeding and things like that?
That's a really good question. I don't know yet. I mean, I think you're still going to have officers that will continue to do the normal thing, because what will happen when this rule gets put in place will be there'll be a massive grace period to then get your ECU programmed in order for you to be governed by that limitation. So you're going to have people, probably a grace period, I would expect 6 months or longer, where you're able to get that thing scheduled into a shop to have the regulations enforced. So you're going to have the normal practices like you always have. You're always going to have your safety blitzes or your brake safety weeks or your international road checks that will still slow people down and check them out. And then I think you'll still have truck drivers that are going to be willing to not go and get the thing done and go fast anyway, because that's just the nature of this industry. There's millions of people doing it. So I do think there'd be an issue there. The other part I think what we have to learn more about is what will happen for intrastate drivers that are just working within their own state, being able to go presumably faster than the interstate drivers. That's another issue that we'll have to kind of get teased out over the next few months as we do the proposed rule and then the comments that follow that.
You're just leading into this, but you said in the beginning of the show that this is the end of the beginning. So what is next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So step one is they did the advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, and they allowed comments. Comments ended July 18th. And now they're going to say, well, we're going to work on that proposed rule, looking at the 15,000 comments that have been made. And in a few months or weeks, it depends on how long or how fast they decide to go, they'll have a proposed rule. When that proposed rule is put out, every media company will be covering it because it's going to be very interesting. And there'll be an opportunity to submit comments to the rule. And the agency will then take all of those comments that are going to happen over whatever period of time they'll have, and then they'll make a final rule. That final rule will then go into effect, and it'll be the law of the land. So we just finished up step one. Step two will be that proposed rule. Step three is the comments, and step four is the final rule. And then there'll be litigation, because there's always litigation. So we have a few more things to get a handle of.
Matthew, it's always great having you on. If people want to reach out, get in touch with you, how can they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Matthew Leffler or look up Armchair Attorney. I have a Twitter handle now. I have a couple hundred followers. I want to follow more people. You can find me at Armchair Addy, Armchair ATTY. ATTY is the abbreviation for the word attorney. So it's really helpful. So find me there. So thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about administrative law, which is fascinating.
Thank you so much, Matthew. We'll be checking back in, of course, on this situation as things progress. Thank you so much.